I'm a college student, and my laptop recently broke. It was in the middle of the semester, so I was really in need of a new one. I searched on eBay and saw an ad for the exact laptop I was looking for. It was a miracle. It was the new HP Pavilion for an absurdly low asking price. I was so excited I immediately bought it, as it was only listed a few hours ago, and I wanted to be sure to get it before anyone else could. Although the thought of it being a scam never even crossed my mind once when buying it. As I waited a while for the laptop to arrive, I'd constantly go back to the page and look at it with anticipation. I was excited. It felt like Christmas. And just over a week later, the laptop finally arrived. A bit annoyed, I noticed that there wasn't much protection for the laptop in the box it came in. But luckily it was fine, and it didn't have any visible damage. I opened the laptop and immediately saw a sticky note on the screen. It was a 4-digit PIN. I was confused. Why would the seller not remove their account prior to sending the laptop? It made no sense to give me the PIN to sign into their account. Why wouldn't you just do a hard reset before shipping it? Of course, I ignored my suspicion and used the PIN to sign into the account. When typing in the PIN, I couldn't help but notice the profile picture to the Outlook account was solid black. A bit eerie, but I continued to sign in anyway. There was nothing special at first. The background was a standard default image of a beach that Microsoft uses with its computers. I assumed all the files and everything would be cleared, and most of them were, but I couldn't help but notice some files still remained on the laptop. What sensible person would leave their files for a stranger to see? Anyway, I was looking through the files. They all looked to be normal photos and videos. They were photos of woods and a river. They didn't seem planned out though, almost as if the photos were accidents. They weren't even symmetrical, and some were just blurry and honestly terrible photos, almost as if they were purposely bad. There was also a single picture of a room. It looked very simple, plain. It had beige walls, a bed, a large vent, and a light. The light made the room look really strange. But just then, I came across a video. The video was absolutely terrifying. It featured off-putting audio, and this weird combination of videos of this man in a very disturbing Mickey Mouse mask, and it was cutting back and forth from him to some very disturbing clips that I couldn't make out. I could hear groans and some shuffling. Earth, Wind & Fire's September was also playing in the background. After a rewatch, I was very uneasy. The combination of all these things made for a very unsettling video. I instantly went back to the ad on eBay for some answers, but it was gone. I couldn't remember the seller's name, but I do remember what town it was shipped from. It was a small town in Utah I'd never heard of. I looked it up to realize that that town didn't even exist. I was confused. I thought maybe this was all just some sick prank pulled by the seller, but that seemed too far-fetched. What person would go through the process of setting up an eBay ad, making this video, putting it on a nice computer, and selling it at such a low cost, and even giving sign-in info of his account? It didn't make sense. There were no more files on the computer, and I tried searching for more things, any hint as to what the video was, but I found nothing. After messing around on the laptop for a bit, I decided to call it a night and head to bed. The next day, I got up at around 6:30 in the morning and went to school. When I got back home later that day, I went to my laptop and sat down, hoping to unwind for the rest of the day. I opened my laptop, and that's when I saw it. It took me a second to notice, but the profile wasn't solid black anymore. It was changed. I sunk into my chair, feeling hot flashes run through me. I sat there for a good minute or two, analyzing and trying to make out what the picture was. It was a close-up, semi-blurry picture of a front door and its doorknob. I instantly wiped everything, and I frantically began deleting the photos and the video from the files. I also removed the account from the laptop. I thought about getting rid of the laptop altogether, but I needed it for school. I couldn't get rid of it. I also would need to do some work. I'm a musician, and I also make films with my good friend. I began to install all the software I use. After about an hour, I was all set. As I began, I completely lost track of time. I had been writing and recording for hours on that computer. However, unavoidably at this point, that video came back to my mind. Specifically just how disturbing that Mickey Mouse mask was, and even the sounds from the video. That's when I saw something. My heart instantly dropped to my stomach. I noticed the light to my webcam was on. It had been on the entire time, and I had been too distracted to even notice. I sat there for a second in shock. frozen as I stared at the small light. I quickly regained my attention and slammed the screen down, shutting it. That was it. I finally took the laptop, heading outside as quickly as I could. I opened it and spread it against the curb, stomping down on it. I broke it in two and proceeded to throw it into my trash bin. I was still absolutely terrified. How long was I being watched? Who was watching me? Was the guy even from Utah? Questions raced in my mind, and of course I called the cops. I was on the phone with 911, and they said they'd send 2 cars over to check around. If I'm being honest with you, I don't think they cared. I think they just sent them to calm me down. After a 5-minute search, they told me that I'd be fine, and that there are just creeps out there who are willing to do anything to scare people. And they left. But to be fair, there wasn't really anything they could do. I didn't sleep that night, and I kept my lights on, blinds closed, doors and windows locked, and I stayed up and watched TV. But while I was doing this, it hit me. That profile picture that was originally black and had changed to a picture of a door and its doorknob. That was my front door. I moved out 2 days later, and I bought a real laptop from Best Buy. To this day, that video is still ingrained into my mind, and it still disturbs me from time to time. And I also wonder how whoever this was able to get a picture of my front door. One thing's for sure though, I will never be using eBay again. My wife and I had recently got married, and we moved into our own place not too long ago. When we moved in, we introduced ourselves to most of the neighbors. We live in an apartment complex that consists of 2 buildings across from each other. The view from our bedroom looks directly at the other building, but hey, the place was cheap and in a good location, so we couldn't complain. We hit it off with one of our neighbors right away. His name was Jeff. He was a bit older, probably mid-30s. Anyway, I go to the gym a lot, and I like to use headphones when I'm working out. Though my headphones recently broke, so I decided to start my search for new ones on eBay. I found a pair of new Beats by Dre wireless headphones for pretty cheap. Cheap enough to think you were getting a good deal, but not enough to think you were getting scammed. I thought I struck gold, so I bought them. But of course, upon arrival, I quickly noticed the headphones were fake. I started the process of filing a complaint with eBay, but deep down I knew it was no use. The weird thing was, as fake as they were, the headphones actually sounded really good. So I took them to my workout at the gym that was on the first floor of my building. I was running on the treadmill, and they were doing really well. Just as I started thinking these counterfeits aren't that bad, the left ear cup started producing this crackling noise. I ignored it and kept running. Then, a loud bang came from both of the cups, and I nearly tripped on the machine, it was so loud. I stopped. Silence completely overtook the headphones. The silent crackling slowly returned, and this time with what seemed like whispers. I knocked on the plastic cups, hoping that it'd fix them. It did, but a few minutes later the crackling noise got loud again, reaching an unbearable pitch. As I was about to take the headphones off, the music started playing again. I didn't think twice about this event. I guess this is what I get for not seeing the signs of buying fake headphones, right? Fast forward to the next day, and I asked Jeff if he could come over and help me install some lights. He's an electrician, and I asked him to help me install a pair of those clapping lights. I guess I watched too many movies, and I really wanted to be able to just clap for the light to come on. I found a good deal and bought a few, and Jeff was helping me install them. He offered to do it for free, which was really nice. Anyway, since eBay hadn't done anything regarding my issue, I decided to keep the headphones. The seller wouldn't give me a refund, and they sounded at least decent, so I sucked it up. 2 days later, I was relaxing on my balcony listening to Kanye's new album at the time, when just then, the same crackling noise started. At first it didn't bother me, but it got louder and louder. It finally got really loud, and then it stopped. Whispers came through the headphones again. I turned up the volume to the max to confirm that there were people whispering, and not just some static sound I was mistaking for whispers. But no. Sure enough, I could hear what sounded like deranged whispers. Though, what stood out to me most was the clear whisper of my wife's name. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't mind the first interference, but this one was about my wife. But I quickly wrote it off as some kind of radio interference, and just a coincidence that I could hear my wife's name. I decided to ask Jeff about it, since like I mentioned earlier, he was an electrician, and he might know something about it. I pulled out my phone and texted him, asking if he could answer a question for me. 2 hours later, and I was still sitting on my balcony without a response from Jeff. Finally, around 8 p.m., I saw Jeff walk out of his building. As soon as he got out, I yelled, asking him if he got my text. He replied saying, "Nah, dude, sorry, I left my phone at work. Why, what's up? Did those lights stop working?" I responded, telling him that the lights were fine, though what I said next seemed to set him off. I asked him how it would be possible to hear whispers through headphones, and if it might have been picking up a radio frequency somehow. Jeff just stopped in his tracks. He was looking up at me, but he wasn't moving or saying anything. After about a minute or so of silence, he responded saying he didn't know and smiled, but it was obviously forced. He then quickly went back into his apartment. I thought the whole encounter was strange, but I didn't think too much about it, and I was decently tired, so I just decided to go to sleep. At around 2 to 3 a.m., some kind of noise woke me up. I'm a light sleeper, and even little things get me, but this sounded pretty loud. I woke up enough to realize that the sound was coming from the headphones. It was the same crackling that got louder and louder. Finally, it went away, and silence took over. I turned the volume all the way up, trying to hear anything, but I still couldn't. Just then, a loud clap came from the headphones. The light in our bedroom turned on instantly. I was still a bit sleepy, so it took me a second to comprehend what was happening. The clap from the headphones must have activated the lights. That's when a thought came to me. I walked over to my window, and that's when I nearly screamed. The building across the street had all lights off, all but one. Jeff was standing in the window in his apartment. He was just looking straight at me. He was holding something that looked like a radio. He brought it to his mouth, and just as he did, the crackling came from the headphones again. Jeff must have somehow switched out my eBay package in front of my door with another package that carried fake headphones that had a speaker in them. I still don't know how he knew I had bought headphones, and why he would even do something like this. Although, the guy did always give me a weird vibe despite his kind demeanor. Needless to say, me and my wife moved out shortly after this experience, and I've never seen Jeff since.
It was Halloween of 2012, and I was closing at work, which is Chick-fil-A. We were a new establishment in the area that we're in, and the neighborhood was pretty bad. In and out all afternoon and evening, I saw hundreds of people dressed in their costumes. All of the cliche costumes, Jason, Freddy Krueger, and Michael Myers. At around 7:30, there was a long line inside, and out of nowhere there was some commotion. My manager came out to break it up. When he broke it up, some guy in the Ghostface costume from Scream ran out of the door. That person that ran out of the door got into it with a woman that was dressed as Meg from Family Guy. At least that's what I thought she was, until she told us that she wasn't in costume. She was just ugly. Anyway, this woman told our manager and the cops that some person in the Ghostface costume tried to lure her 7-year-old daughter out of the building to his car. The little girl was running back and forth between her mother, who was in line, and the play area inside. I guess the man in the Scream costume told the girl that her mom told her to wait in his car, and he grabbed her. The mom turned around and saw it. Then she started to yell and scream. A few hours later, we locked the doors, and then some guy knocked at our drive-through window. He had on a Ghostface costume from the movie Scream, but I don't know if it was the same guy from earlier. I yelled out that we're closed, and this guy tries to bust through the drive-through window. I screamed, and the manager ran out. And then that man ran to our front door banging. Then he stopped and just stared at us. At that point, it was just my manager and I. My manager called the cops, and the man left and popped his trunk of his car. He grabbed something out of his trunk and put it under his costume. He then walked back up to the front door. He stared for another 30 seconds and pulled out a gun from under his costume, aimed it, and pulled the trigger. We both ducked and screamed, but nothing happened. We looked up and he was fumbling with his gun. He was loading, unloading, and reloading. It had jammed. Then the cops showed up with their guns drawn. He got on the ground and they arrested this guy. We found out that this was a dangerous guy and he had a huge rap sheet, and we were pretty lucky that nothing happened to us that night. It may be cowardly, but I quit that job soon after that happened because of the neighborhood that Chick-fil-A was in.
This all started with a cup of water. Every morning I wake up, climb out of bed, march downstairs, and fill a tall glass with tap water and drink it. But this time, the water went down the wrong way. I started coughing, sputtering, almost choking. I set the glass down on the countertop, turned away, and thumped my chest until I stopped coughing. When I turned back, the cup of water was gone. I froze, motionless. Only my eyes moved, darting back and forth around the kitchen. There was a shift in the air, a subtle drift, as though something was moving through the room with incredible speed. I stepped back from the countertop, and my heel bumped into something. I span around, and my heel bumped into a glass of water. It tumbled over with a dull and clattering thud. I picked it up and studied it, turning it over in my hand like it was some strange alien artifact. What just happened? I called my sister to tell her what happened, and she laughed. There must have been a reasonable explanation, she said. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for it. Maybe I dropped the glass in my coughing fit, and it somehow landed upright. Crazier things have happened. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. Little things became all too common. Each event was slightly less unexplainable than the last. But still, I shrugged it off, trying to think of reasonable explanations. But then it happened. I snapped awake. It was 2:58 a.m. on a Tuesday, bright light blinding into my dilated eyes. Somehow, the lights were on. A power surge, maybe? I thought. I climbed out of bed, marched across the room, and froze. I froze because my bedroom door was open. But this didn't bother me too much. What bothered me was the glass of half-empty water sitting on the floor in the middle of the upstairs hallway. That bothered me for several reasons, most of which being I didn't put it there. I crept out into the hallway. I got down and lifted the glass of water. There were fingerprints fogged on the glass, dozens and dozens of them. I literally dropped the glass as I saw them. It thumped onto the carpet and spilled over, an expanding puddle of water absorbing into the carpet. I glanced over my back shoulder. This looming sense of unease climbed through my body. I pushed back to standing, and there was another glass of water, half empty, sitting on the top of the stairs. I walked forward, looked down the stairs, and there was another one, sitting halfway down the steps. It was a trail of half-empty cups. I was honestly just thinking about calling the police at this point. I reached for my phone instinctively, but it wasn't there. I always kept my phone in my pocket, even when I slept. But now it was gone. Somebody was hiding in my house. I was sure of it. I looked back over my shoulder, down the hallway, towards my bedroom. I questioned if it fell out of my pocket, or maybe I left it in my bed. I was about to go look, when downstairs, something buzzed against the hardwood floor. That distinct pattern I made for notifications rang out. Somehow my phone was downstairs. I turned back, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. My phone was on the kitchen floor, buzzing around in circles. I stepped over, picked it up, and flicked on the screen. I'd had enough, and was going to call the police. But I froze. My eyes caught a push notification at the top of the screen. New photo saved to iCloud, it read. I raised an eyebrow, tapped into it, and my heart dropped. It was a photo of me asleep. It said it was taken at 2:57 a.m., 1 minute before I woke up. A sickening feeling of dread spiraled through me as everything piled up. The cups of water, the lights turning on, the phone being downstairs, and now finally a photo of me, a photo which somebody else had taken as I slept. I dialed 911. 911, where are you located? The voice answered. I responded with my address. What's your emergency? He replied. There's somebody in my house. Are you in a room? Please get to a safe room and lock the door. I bolted to the nearest bathroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Okay, sir, are you safe? But before I could answer, a door slammed shut somewhere upstairs. He's upstairs, I said. Help is on the way, just focus on your breathing. Upstairs, another door swung open and slammed shut. The intruder was searching now, checking each and every room in order. Sir, are you there? Yeah, I whispered. Slamming doors were getting closer. The final door upstairs slammed shut, and suddenly, a door downstairs swung open and slammed shut. Were there multiple intruders? Either there were, or this person was impossibly fast. Sir? Sir, are you still in the bathroom? The bathroom? How did they know I was hiding in the bathroom? I never told them I was hiding in the bathroom.
Sir, are you there?
The voice said again, but this time I could hear it on the other side of the door. I was hearing the 911 operator's voice inside my house. The intruder was somehow talking to me on my phone and was pretending to be a 911 operator. The bathroom doorknob rattled.
Sir, open the door,
He said. Dropping my phone, I wrapped my grip around the handle, pulling back with all my strength.
Sir, please open the door.
I didn't budge.
Sir, open the door.
He kept repeating, like a broken record, like a pre-made recording, all the while pulling back at the doorknob trying to get in. The lights started turning on and off, a rapid cycle between light and dark, faster and faster.
Sir, we can't help you if you don't open the door.
He said, almost sounding on the verge of laughter now. Suddenly, outside, around the corner, the front door burst open. A voice yelled out police, and there was silence. I remained quiet. I didn't trust it. Whatever I was dealing with didn't seem to play by the rules of reality. I wasn't going to fall for it. I remained silent, hands gripped around the doorknob and remaining motionless.
Hello?
A deep voice said.
I'm getting no response. Requesting backup.
I hid in the bathroom for an hour until the actual police found me. I was a nervous wreck, understandably so, telling them about the woman on the phone, telling them about the cups of water on the floor. Unsurprisingly, they sent me in for a psych evaluation, and I was discharged a few days later. Of course, no one believed me, even when I showed them the photo of me sleeping. I moved out over the next month. No way I was sticking around after that. In hindsight, I should have moved out way earlier. I'm now living upstate, in a much smaller house, less places for would-be intruders to hide. I have cameras set up everywhere, so this time, if anyone messes with me, I'll have proof. It's all connected to my phone, too, so I can even check the cameras while I'm at work. I might be a coward, but I'm not stupid. So, anyways, quite a few uneventful months had gone by since the incident. In fact, nothing else had even happened until tonight. I was even starting to wonder if maybe my sister was right. Maybe I had a momentary lapse in sanity. But now I was laying on my bed. I can't move. I'm paralyzed with fear, and writing this is the only thing that even remotely calms me down. Earlier, about an hour and 23 minutes ago to be exact, I got home from work and crawled right into bed. That was my first mistake. I broke my ritual. My ritual was to check all the cameras before entering the house, checking to see if any motion was recorded during the day. But I reasoned that I was tired, and it was late after work. I just wanted to sleep. I'll just check the cameras in bed, I thought. But of course, today, of all days, is the day something happened. 9 hours and 23 minutes ago, the bedroom camera recorded motion. I watched the footage on my phone just 20 minutes ago. It was footage of me, mulling around the house, getting ready for work, and then leaving. At first, I breathed relief. Of course it was just me. I was a little late this morning. But then, 30 seconds after I had left, motion was detected from my bedroom camera. The footage appeared. My empty bedroom was on the screen. It was dark. I squinted. There was nothing. But then suddenly, in the footage, the lights flicked on, though there was still nothing. They flicked on and off, and then I saw something that filled me with fear far beyond anything I'd ever felt, a fear far beyond anything I even knew was possible. When the lights flicked back on, a person appeared. A person standing in the middle of my room with pin-straight posture, hands over their face like someone playing peekaboo. The footage fast-forwarded on its own now, shadows drifting across the wall as the sun outside moved downward. But the person just stood there, motionless as the world sped by, hands covering their face, unmoving. The footage snapped back to real time, 30 seconds before I had arrived home. The person slightly perked up, hearing my arrival. Then, they dropped to their knees, hands still covering their face, and in one smooth, almost robotic motion, they fell to their side and rolled under the bed which I was currently laying on. This happened in 2015 when I was 16 and still living in my hometown. My hometown's in the middle of nowhere. It's so remote it's probably not even known by surrounding areas. Basically, there's 3 things you can do there as a teenager. Go to the movies, swim, or go to this pathetic little place called Miller's Fun Park. It's relatively similar to a lot of fun park type things, only a whole lot worse. There's this crappy arcade with broken skee-ball machines, batting cages that probably haven't been used since the early 80s, a pathetic mini golf course, and the most dangerous go-karts you've probably ever seen in your life. If there weren't workers there, I would honestly just think it was abandoned. That's how bad it was. Now, Miller's Fun Park was on the edge of a forest, about 3 miles worth. If our town was in the middle of nowhere, this park was practically on the moon. Anyway, my cousin Emma and I decided one summer night that we wanted to go go-karting and possibly mess around in the arcade. It was around 10 p.m., so we knew it'd be almost deserted, but that was the way we liked it. I picked her up from her house, and we made the long drive down. Once we had arrived, we noticed the parking lot was almost completely empty, other than the employees' cars. Though, this really wasn't surprising, as this place had seen better days, and was obviously not going to stay in business much longer. We hopped out of the car and paid for some go-karting tickets. There was no one there except a few guys in the arcade around our age. But that's when we noticed this guy, maybe mid-60s, leaning up against the fence that leads to the forest. It was weird though. He was on the other side, as if he had just come from behind the trees. Emma and I didn't pay much attention to him, and went to the go-kart track. Like I said, these karts were incredibly dangerous, so I focused on nothing but making sure I wasn't going to skid and flip as we raced way too fast around the windy track. This is why I didn't notice when the guy must have climbed the fence and was now sitting on a bench near the track. He stared at me with the most unsettling expression, a creepy smile playing on his cracked lips as his dark eyes looked at us. I managed an uneasy smile back so as not to seem rude. I handed another ticket to the guy running the go-karts, and Emma and I went off. Though, this time I couldn't focus. The dude gave me the worst type of feeling. My eyes were constantly finding their way to that bench where he sat, unmoving, and watching us every time we were in his view. The thing that was bothering me the most was that we had only bought 3 tickets. We were on our second to last run, and this guy was sitting directly where we needed to go to exit the track. I was just praying he'd move before we were done. But of course, luck wasn't on my side that night. Our last go came and went, and I had no choice but to pull in and park next to him, unbuckle my seatbelt, and get out of my go-kart. I glanced over at Emma a few feet away as I opened the exit gate to see if she was as scared as I was, but she didn't seem to notice as she started bragging about how she beat me the last 2 races. I was barely listening to her at that point. I opened the gate, and the guy stepped in front of me just as I was leaving.
What are you girls doing out so late?
He said with a little smile on his face. My eyes instantly darted over to Emma, who was looking at the dude with both confusion and annoyance. She asked him what he was talking about, as she tried pushing past him to leave.
Do your parents know you're out this late?
He said. I quickly replied with yes, and that they were actually waiting in the parking lot to pick us up, and that we needed to go. This was a lie, and probably sounded like it from my tone, but I tried to push past him anyway. It didn't work. He grabbed my shoulder to keep me in front of him.
That's not true. I saw you girls pull up alone.
My heart dropped to my stomach.
Why don't I walk you to your car?
He starts inching towards me, and I looked up at Emma for help. With one swift movement, she pulled me halfway behind her and started sizing the guy up. This was pretty dumb, as we were both small, and though she's a few inches taller than me, neither of us are anywhere near his size. This guy clears 6'2" easy, but she doesn't seem to care. Emma quickly told the guy that we were actually going to go to the arcade, because my boyfriend was going to meet us there, and he was already waiting for us. Now, I did have a boyfriend at the time, but he wasn't coming. He wasn't even in town. I knew she knew this, but I'm glad she actually made up a pretty good lie. The guy's face immediately changed. His smile disappeared, and he was now glaring down at me with a look of annoyance in his eyes. Emma didn't give the guy time to say anything. She grabbed my arm and tugged me behind her into the arcade. The boys from before had already left, and the usual girl who worked in there was nowhere to be found. Still, it felt safer than outside. We ran to the back and hid behind one of the claw machines. I asked Emma what we should do, as I left my phone in the car. There was no way I was going out there alone. Emma said we should just make a run for the car. I wanted to disagree, but I knew we had no other option. I swallowed hard, honestly wanting to cry. I'd never been that scared before. There was something so off about that guy. We slowly made our way out of the arcade, looking around to see if he was nearby. The park was now absolutely deserted. Emma practically had to drag me to the exit. I was looking every direction, every second, waiting for the guy to come out of the woods and confront us, possibly even worse. But he didn't. Everything was completely quiet except for the sounds of the night. As we slowly creeped closer to the car, Emma told me to get my keys out and have them ready. So I did. I pulled them from my pocket. We were about 20 feet from my car when I stopped dead in my tracks. I was staring at the car keys in my hand, and that's when I got this pure feeling of dread that overtook me. I had never locked the car. I could see the fear in Emma's eyes as I told her. She turned back around and continued inching towards the car. I grabbed her arm to stop her, but she pulled away.
I'm just gonna look. If I say run, you run.
Her voice was quiet. I nodded shakily. She eventually made it close enough to see inside. By the way she was squinting, I knew it was way too dark to make anything out. It was absolutely pitch black this night. My heart was beating out of my chest, thinking things like, what if he was in there? What if he jumps out? Or what if we get in and he's hiding in the trunk? All of these thoughts almost drowned out the unmistakable sound of shoes slamming against the pavement. My head whipped around instantly, and there he was, sprinting at us full speed out of the woods. I screamed bloody murder as I broke for the car, jiggling the handle as I realized I had locked it on us. Emma was already on the other side, screaming at me to unlock it. I fumbled with the keys, but managed not to drop them as I unlocked the door, flung it open, and practically threw myself inside. I'd managed to close the door right as the guy got close. He was slamming his fists against the window and shouting incoherently. I was sobbing at this point and barely managed to lock the doors as he went for the handle and continually yanked on it as hard as he could. Emma was screaming at me to go, and through my tears I shoved the key into the ignition and flew into reverse. He was still chasing us and yelling as I veered backwards out of the lot and turned as fast as I could while slamming on the gas. I could barely see the road through the flood of tears. Emma had to grab the wheel several times to keep us from crashing before I regained some composure. Though obviously shaken up, she managed to keep her tears in as we drove 30 miles over the speed limit the whole way back home. Both of us agreed not to tell either of our parents about this, but looking back, I wish we had, because there was something seriously wrong with that guy. We were too scared of what they might say or do. I think I thought they'd blame us somehow, so it stayed a secret between us. Somehow even we didn't talk about it until months after the horrifying encounter. It's safe to say, we never went back to Miller's Fun Park after that.
My name is Shelly, and 10 years ago, I wanted to make my own money because I was tired of asking my parents for money. I put in a lot of applications and I ended up getting hired at Chick-fil-A. I'm not going to lie, I was definitely excited because of all of the chicken nuggets I was going to be eating. Anyways, after I got hired, I started to get the hang of the job. It was pretty easy. I worked outside in the drive-thru line a lot because we were the busiest fast food restaurant in our town, and people really liked my personality. After working there for a few months, my dad's creepy friend Tyler would come there every day at the same time and go to the same drive-thru line, which was weird because I worked there after school, and there were 2 drive-thru lines. The drive-thru line he'd always go to was mine, and he would always call me Shell Shell, which I've hated since I was a small kid. The thing is, he'd always order small stuff like a small fry, or a small cookies and cream milkshake. A few times he came into the line, pull up to me, and then he'd say that he forgot his debit card, and he would just try and talk to me. I'm not dumb. I knew exactly what he was doing. Ever since I turned 13, he always acted weird toward me, telling me that I'm growing up into a woman, or that I look like a young woman now. There was this time when my parents were having a get-together with family and friends, and I yelled out to my parents that I had to pee, and I ran upstairs. I swear a few seconds later, Tyler burst through the door, looked at me and said, "Wow," and stared at me. Then he straightened up real quick and said, "Sorry, my bad," and closed the door. Like I said, he was weird. So we closed at 10 p.m., but we always take orders up until around 9:59. One day, we were inside cleaning up, and it was around 10:30 p.m. There were about 5 or 6 of us in Chick-fil-A at the time. I was mopping the floor, and a few of us saw a car pull up to the drive-thru, but turned around at the entrance because we put cones out there after 10 p.m. The car drove around our parking lot at least 10 minutes, and I noticed that it had temporary tags on it. After a while, our manager went outside and went up to the car due to it stopping in front of one of our windows every time it drove around. I watched the manager walk to the car as the driver rolled down the window. The window was all the way down before my manager reached the car, and to my surprise, it was Tyler, my dad's friend. He had a new car that I didn't recognize, but what made this very weird was that even when he rolled the window down, He never looked at my manager. He was staring directly at me, talking with my manager. I was standing behind the entrance door. He saw me looking at him, looking at me, but he never turned away like a normal person would. My manager walked back in and told me and my coworkers to hurry up so we can get out of here. I was the last person to get done with my closing, so it was just me and my manager. My manager told me to make sure the doors are locked. I told him okay, then I went to the bathroom. I figured I'd lock them once I'm done. As usual, I was on my phone while using the bathroom, and the bathroom door opens. I thought it was weird because my manager is the only other person in the building, and he's a guy. I yelled out that he's an idiot and he's in the wrong bathroom, but the thing is, he never left. It got weirder because I can hear him breathing by the door, but then I heard, "Shell, it's me, Tyler Poop. Are you in here?" I picked up my feet so he couldn't see them, but then he started to push open every stall door, saying my name. I texted my boss and it literally said, "Help, bathroom." Then Tyler got to my stall. He attempted to push the door open and then he laughed. He said that he knows that I'm in there. He looked in the crack of the door and said, "There you are." He then got down on his hands and knees, reached his hand under the door, and attempted to unlock the stall. I kicked his arm and he said, "It's me, Uncle Tyler." As he said that, he proceeded to crawl under my stall door. I started to climb above my stall, then my manager burst through the door as I was screaming and crying. Tyler and my manager began to fight. I called the cops. After a few seconds, Tyler was unconscious on the bathroom floor. When the cops and the EMS got there, he was cuffed and loaded up into the ambulance. He was hit with a few charges and was recently released from jail. That situation just heightened my awareness of my surroundings. Back when I was living on the streets, well, technically in my car, I would always post up by fast food restaurants because people would always give me their change or some of the food that they had recently purchased. One day I posted at the entrance of a plaza, and in that plaza the busiest place was a Chick-fil-A. Throughout the day I received a few bucks and a lot of chicken nuggets. After being out there for a few hours, I noticed a car that left a few times and came back to park in the Chick-fil-A parking lot with covered license plates. But the person never got out of the car. Of course I thought it was weird, but I didn't think anything of it. Throughout the day, I'd take my food to my car and I'd eat. Around 8 p.m., most of the plaza was closing up, and the traffic started to slow down. Finally, when Chick-fil-A slowed down for a few minutes, a man in the car got out and he walked up to the door of the restaurant and took a picture of the inside. A few seconds later, what looked like the manager came outside, and it looked like she was arguing with the guy. She went back inside and the man got back in his car, got on his phone, and left about 5 minutes later. FYI, I was parked about 25 feet away from the Chick-fil-A parking lot and could see everything that was going on. So a few hours go by, and the place was closed. From the outside, it looked as if the employees were cleaning up. I was trying to fall asleep, then I saw that car from earlier pull up. Then it woke me all the way up. There were 2 cars left in the parking lot. His car and some other car. And some people left. The only person I saw inside was the woman that he was talking to earlier. I saw the man get out of his car at this point. He was wearing dark colors and with gloves on. And I saw the lights get turned off inside of Chick-fil-A. The man was standing on the side of the building by a dumpster, but in a way where he can't be seen. He was in the shadows. At that point, I leaned my seat all the way back so no one could see me. The woman walked out, turned around, and began to lock the door. As soon as she turned around, that man sprinted toward her, yanked her hair, and started to yell at her as he took her back inside. I leaned up a little bit to get a better look, but I couldn't see anything. There was nothing for about 10 minutes, until the man walked back outside. He went straight to his car, but instead of driving away, he drove up to the door and went back in with his trunk left open. A few minutes later, I saw something that I would never forget. The man was dragging the woman's body, but there was no head. He struggled to get her in the trunk, but eventually he got her there. He went back in there and came out with a Chick-fil-A bag full of something and threw it in his trunk. He went back inside again for what seemed like 20 minutes. He came back out, locked up Chick-fil-A, and drove away. Someone else came back for the other car in the parking lot. A few days later, I went into a Starbucks to use the restroom, and on the news was a story about a missing woman. They showed the picture, and it was the woman who worked at Chick-fil-A. They were interviewing her husband, who was crying during the whole interview. What creeped me out is that her husband was the man that I saw with her that fateful night. I know he killed her, but he was on the news as if he didn't have anything to do with it, and like he doesn't know. Seeing that lady that night has haunted me since.
When I was younger, maybe around 9, my grandparents would take me to this bowling alley with them. They played for this bowling league, while I found anything to do in the building as long as I stayed in my grandparents' line of sight. That was the rule they set for me, though most of the time they were so caught up in their game, I would sneak to the back where the cool games were. The bowling alley also doubled as an arcade, and my grandparents would give me money to keep me entertained. One of the workers there would always come to the back corner with me and watch me play one of the most popular games at the time. As a 9-year-old, I thought it was cool, as I felt like I had a 20-year-old friend I could have fun with and play games. Though, looking back, I realized just how weird this was. This night, I was playing the game with this 20-year-old employee like usual, when I looked back and noticed the guy was recording me with his phone. Now, again, I was 9, and while I thought it was weird, I didn't understand just how wrong this really was. I looked back at my game, as it required my attention, and asked him what he was doing. But when I get the chance to look back at him, maybe 10 seconds later, he was gone. This honestly really disturbed me, and caused me to go back to my grandparents and sit with them for the rest of the night. But a few minutes later, I saw him again peeking around from one of the game machines. He was giving me that finger gesture, indicating for me to come to him. Against my better judgment, I did. He told me he had something cool to show me, but that I was in the back. I didn't even get a chance to respond before he grabbed my arm and started pulling me to the back through the employees only door. I was a little worried at this point, but didn't question it. He proceeded to lead me through a back exit of the building into this dimly lit parking lot where I assume all the employees parked. He clicked the button on his car keys to open the trunk, and he told me he had some really cool games he wanted to show me. But his trunk was empty. He told me to get in and look closer, as they were hidden in the back a bit. But just as I was about to start crawling in and look, I hear the back door open again as my grandma screamed as loud as I've ever heard her scream. I backed away, and the guy slammed the trunk closed, got in his car, and booked it out of there. My grandma called the police immediately, and was now crying. Me being a little kid, I still didn't understand what was going on, but started crying too at the sight of my grandma crying. I'm a lot older now, but this memory still haunts me to this day. I remember genuinely thinking nothing was wrong in that situation. Apparently, the guy was later arrested in his house by police, and obviously fired. And apparently the guy was fired from his job before the arcade, for similar things to what he had done to me. Overall, just a really disturbing dude.
My name is Andrea, and I'm a single mother. I don't tell you this like it's some badge of honor and I'm expecting cookies, milk, and chocolate-covered snowflakes like most of the others in my social circle would. They want your pats on the back and recognition. I just want some of your time. I see motherhood as a burden. Necessary, yes, but still a burden. My son's name is Jesse. He's 11. That's 5th grade for the math haters. Jesse started the 5th grade this year like any other kid would. There was a little bit of trepidation and lots of excitement. He was a happy-go-lucky sort of kid, full of life and energy. All that changed after he met Stan on Tuesday. Stan was a late addition to Jesse's class, a transfer student from another district. Jesse's teacher sat Stan next to Jesse. When I picked Jesse up after school on Tuesday, he told me that Stan was his new best friend. He wasn't acting like himself, though. I took his temperature, but he wasn't running a fever. I asked about his day, and all he would tell me was that Stan was his new best friend. "Stan is my new best friend," Jesse would say. "I know, I can't wait to meet him," I'd say back. "Mom, Stan is great, you should meet him." He's my new best friend, the best in the world. We must have had the same conversation 1,000 times that night. When I tucked Jesse in bed, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. He put his little hand in front of his face and wiggled his index finger, telling me to come closer. I bent over him, and he put his hands to either side of his mouth. You know, the little kid way of telling a secret? Well, I turned my head, and he whispered something into my ear that chilled me. At the time, I didn't know why it chilled me, but it did. He whispered, "You believe me, right, Mom?" I sat back up and looked down at him. "Believe you about what, honey?" "Stan," he said. "Stan's my best friend." I nodded and took his temperature once more. Again, he wasn't running a fever. I went to bed but couldn't really sleep that night. On Wednesday, when I pulled up to the school to drop Jesse off, he got this really weird look on his face and told me that he didn't want to go in. "Are you feeling sick?" I asked. "No," he said. He was chewing on his bottom lip like crazy. This was something else I'd never seen him do. "No, I need to go to school." He opened the car door and got out. No goodbye, no I love you, nothing. He trudged up the front steps of the school with his head down. I let off the brake and turned away to drive to work. A little boy was standing right in front of my car. 2 more seconds and I would have run him over. The boy was pale, with a mop of blonde hair that was almost white and bright blue eyes. He knocked on the hood of my car twice, waved once, and walked up the stairs to school. When I picked Jesse up after school on Wednesday, he looked a lot better. He was a tiny bit paler than normal, but he seemed happy. He told me all about his day. He told me about dinosaurs and music and math. And then he told me about recess. And then, after math period, we had recess. "Mom, you'll never guess what I did today at recess." "Tell me," I said, smiling to myself as I'm driving. I'm thinking tag, football, keep away, all the things I remember the boys doing at recess when I was that age. Something benign, something normal. I joined a church. I frowned at this. A church? At recess? Jesse nodded. The Church of Stan. I thought that it must be some sort of new make-believe game that kids were playing. "What's the Church of Stan?" I asked. "It's Stan's church, Mom." Jesse laughed like I was the silliest person in the world for asking that question. "What do you guys do, though? You know, as members?" I asked. "Lots of stuff. Today, though, we just listened to Stan talk. He was saying some funny words, and I got sleepy and dozed off. A bunch of us did." I pulled into the driveway at home, and we got out. "What was it?" I asked. Things sounded weird for sure, but the kids didn't seem to be doing anything wrong. "Stan gave us flyers, too." Jesse pulled out a crinkled-up piece of paper and handed it to me. It was a manila piece of paper with 3 words written in black marker. Church of Stan. Again, weird, but nothing wrong. I thought the boys were playing make-believe. I was wrong. When I picked Jesse up after school yesterday, I could tell that something was very wrong with my little boy. He looked panicked and scared. "What's going on, honey?" I asked, reaching out to feel his forehead. "No fever." "We played the soul game today," he said. Jesse's head was on a swivel. He couldn't sit still. He kept looking all around as we headed home. "The soul game?" I asked. Jesse just nodded and kept trying to look everywhere at once. Beads of sweat dotted his upper lip. "What's the soul game?" I asked. Jesse shook his head and said nothing. "Jesse, what's the soul game?" I asked. I told him I didn't want to, but he said he wouldn't be my friend anymore if I didn't play. "Who wouldn't be your friend? And where were the teachers?" Jesse started breathing harder, but still answered. "It happened in the church," he said. Then he whispered, "Teachers aren't allowed in the church." "The Church of Stan?" I asked. Jesse nodded, and a tear slipped down his cheek. "What's the soul game, Jesse? I'm your mother." "You tell me right now and I'll take care of everything," I said. "I can't tell you, Mom. I can't. The rules are bad. They're so bad." "What about Stan?" I asked. "Will Stan tell me the rules?" "No!" Jesse screamed this and scared me half to death. "Don't ask him the rules. Please don't, Mom. Please." I pulled into the driveway. scared and confused. "Promise me, Mom. Promise me, promise me, promise me, please." Jesse was bawling now, terrified. I took him into my arms and rocked him. I hadn't rocked him like that since he'd been in kindergarten. He fell asleep in my arms and I carried him inside. I took him straight to his room and got him ready for bed. He just needs sleep, I kept telling myself. All he needs is sleep. I put him in his bed and ate dinner alone. I checked up on him around 9 when I went to bed. He seemed to be sleeping so well, so I decided to go to sleep. I woke up to him screaming at the top of his lungs 18 minutes after midnight last night. I ran to his room, but he wasn't in his bed. I turned on the light, and Jesse came flying out of the closet like something was chasing him. He lashed onto my leg and kept screaming. I tried to calm him down and ask what was wrong at the same time. He wasn't making any sense. He kept screaming about the soul game. He was impossible. I kept asking him what that was, but he wouldn't tell me. I tried to put him back to bed, but he would have none of it. Finally, I just took him to my room and he slept in my bed. Jesse fell right to sleep. I was lying on my side watching him, stroking his hair, when his eyes popped open and he stared right into mine. "I'll tell you the rules after school tomorrow, lady," he said. Then he closed his eyes. What was going on with my kid? In the darkness, I stared at the ceiling for a long time before rolling over to my side and staring into the bathroom. You know when you're on the edge of sleep, sometimes your leg will kick and jerk you awake? Or you'll imagine you're falling, or that you've just tripped over something and get jerked awake? That happened to me last night. Only I kept being ripped from sleep by seeing something in the doorway to the bathroom. Every time my eyes would start to slip shut, I'd see the dark outline of something large in the doorway and jerk awake. Of course, nothing would be there and I would start falling asleep again. The outline would appear in the doorway once more, but it would be closer to me, like it had taken a baby step. Over and over this happened until morning. This morning on the way to school, Jesse seemed out of it, lethargic. I felt the same way. I was even more exhausted. I thought of asking Jesse about what he'd said right before he fell asleep, but couldn't. I was afraid it would send him into hysterics again. I drove him to school, and he didn't say a word the whole time. He was acting like a robot, listless, unemotional. I got a call shortly after dropping him off to come pick him back up. He vomited in class. When I picked him up, he was the same. I asked him several questions, but he only gave me grunts in response. The plan at home was to get him changed out of his dirty clothes and then take him to the doctor. He didn't say anything until we pulled into the driveway. "Can Stan come over today?" he asked. He stared out the windshield at the garage door. "You're not feeling well, honey, and do you really want him to come over?" I asked. I wanted to meet this kid, but it didn't sound like Jesse wanted him over. I, however, wanted to get to the bottom of things. "Yes," Jesse said. "Okay," I said. "Do you have his parents' number?" "He already asked his parents and they said it was okay." "We have to wait until he's out of class, and I'd still like to talk to his parents." "Okay." Jesse got out of the car, and we walked into the house. "You have their number?" I asked as I shut the door. "No," he said. I started to ask him how I was supposed to call them if I didn't have their number, but someone knocked on the door. I was still standing right next to it. I opened the door, and standing on my front step was the pale little boy with the blue eyes and mop of white blonde hair that I'd almost run over on Wednesday. A little girl stood next to him with the same complexion. "Yes?" I asked. "Hi, Driz," the little boy said. "Is Jesse home?" The little boy standing on my front porch shouldn't have known that name. It was my nickname from college, created on a drunken night amongst my girlfriends, shortened from Drizzy. "No," I said. "That's fine," the little girl said. "My name is Devin, and you already know my brother's name." "Stan," I said. The little girl covered her mouth and giggled. Stan smiled and shrugged. "It's really quite simple. Rule 1, don't walk past the mirrors in the dark. Rule 2, don't leave any doors open when you go to bed tonight. Ask your son what Rule 3 is, and remember, a creak means you're falling behind. A rustle means you've almost lost. When the lights go down, hopefully you won't see the dark shadow standing in the corner of the room. Hopefully you won't hear it breathing as your eyes shut and you begin to drift off. And if you hear a bang, well, hopefully you'll never hear a bang. Stan turned and walked away with his sister. I stared at them both and shook my head. I wouldn't play their stupid game. I walked into the house and found Jesse sitting at the kitchen table, crying. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I heard a bang," he whispered. My mouth went dry. "When does the game end?" I asked. "It doesn't," he whispered. "It never ends." My heart started beating faster. "What's the third rule, Jesse?" His face fell, and he sucked in a deep breath. "Rule 3. Knowing all 3 rules makes you a player." My stomach dropped. "What happens if you lose?" "When it's dark, you'll hear them coming. They like to let you know when they're getting close." "Who?" "Stan and Devin," Jesse said. "They'll reach out through the mirrors or open doorways and drag you through." "How do you win?" I asked. "You win if you tell more people the rules to the soul game than the person that told you does."
This happened back in 2013. I was only 17 years old then. Because of my parents' constant arguments, my parents decided to go their separate ways prior to this, so we ended up living with my mom. I had a younger brother and an older sister. We live in a neighborhood where it's not necessary to lock your front gate, nor close your front doors, since everyone pretty much knows everyone. It was still in the early evening, at about 6 p.m. Mom usually comes home by 8. Now, it's important to note that we didn't lock the front gate, although it was closed, and our front door was wide open. We do this all the time because it's hot and we want the breeze to come in. We don't worry about it much because we have a screen door, which is unlocked too. My brother and I were watching TV when suddenly we heard our gate slam open. It was made of metal with this huge chain dangling on it. I immediately jumped out of the couch and stood in front of the screen door to see who came in and slammed the gate that loud. It takes about 8 to 10 steps to get to our front door from the gate, and I swear on that split second where I jumped from the couch toward the screen door, the man was already in front of me, with only the screen door between us. He looked to be about 30 or 40 years old, only wearing a white and very dirty tank top. It was ripped in some areas, and it looked like he had rolled around in the mud or something. He had a beard and was carrying something bloody. His hand was bloody too, and he had a crazy look in his eyes. He was also panting, like he had run all the way to get to my house. I was terrified, and my hand was already on the screen door's handle. I was holding it closed. I knew right then and there that he was not supposed to be at our home at all. I didn't want him to see me lock the door since it might provoke him, so I didn't say anything. I just froze right in front of him. He says, "I'm a friend of your dad. He ordered this and wanted me to bring it over." He lifted the bloody cellophane so I can see it from eye level. There was meat inside. I have no idea what kind except that it smells so bad. "It's just 120 pesos. 2 kilos, he added. And that's about $2.36 if converted. I can feel my hands shaking at this point. I didn't believe a single thing that he said, so I told him, "No, we're okay. My dad changed his mind and we don't want to buy it. Thank you." I locked the door and I still held it close since it's just a barrel bolt lock. I knew that if he were even just to try to jiggle the handle, the lock would move and it would be open in a jiffy. He didn't say anything more, and just kind of looked to the side where our front gate and the sidewalk is, and then he looked back at me. I saw him put the cellophane down on the floor and calmly walk back to our gate, and then he ran away as fast as he could. As soon as he was gone, our neighbor, he's just a few years older than me, approached me and asked us who that was. I told him that we had no idea. We looked at the meat, and it was soaked with blood, dark blood, and we were both terrified since it's already dark, and we both just wanted to be in the safety of our own homes. He offered to throw the meat away from me, and I ended up cleaning the blood from our front step. I called my mom and told her what happened, and she told us to immediately lock the gate and close both doors until she got home. We told our dad about it too, and he told us that he would never order something from someone as crazy looking like that. The whole neighborhood knew about it, and from then on we always made sure our gates and homes were locked. We asked around, and they said it was actually just a man who was probably high on cocaine or turned crazy, and was seen a few times in the area. They said he had a family, and they abandoned him for having an unstable mind, and he has been wandering around ever since. Up until now, I still don't know what kind of meat that was, or where he got it from. My sister and the neighbor told me it was probably a stray dog or something, but they probably just told me that to reassure me that I didn't see human meat. Not like it made me feel any better that it was a random animal, since it took me a long time to get over that incident. I didn't ask my mom about it again, and my mom told me not to worry about it, and that she'll make sure it'll never happen again. I've tried blocking it out of my mind ever since, but reading terrifying stories here made me remember how terrifying it is to meet unstable people like this.
I worked night security for a mall back in 2014. I'm a 6'7" male, and I like to think of myself as a fairly tough and intimidating guy. The mall I worked at was really big. It was probably the largest in my state, and all the way up to about 8:30 p.m., it would still be quite busy. Only around 9:30 would we manage to usher out all the stragglers, and only at about 11 would all the business owners leave. My job was basically to patrol the mall and make sure there was no one sticking around after the doors were closed during the night. Now, we didn't have guns or batons, only a can of mace that was very rarely used. There were multiple occasions where we would find would-be thieves hiding or trying to break into shops after dark, but they were normally far outnumbered by the 4 or 5 of us on shift at a time, and they would usually be intimidated by me or some of the other imposing members of security. This one night, though, things started getting really weird for me on the night shift. I'd say it was about 2 a.m., and I was standing in the middle of the empty food court eating a sandwich. This was the only part of the mall that had any light at nighttime, due to the skylight, so it was comfortable to eat there. While I was eating, though, I heard a banging noise from the hallway leading off from the food courts and to some of the bathrooms. It sounded like a stall door being slammed shut. I was immediately put on edge, and I flicked on my flashlight. I can remember creeping down the hallway, flashlight in hand, illuminating a good few feet in front of me. The mall was almost pitch black everywhere else. As I got closer to the end of the hall, the noise became louder, until I was at the end of the hallway, and there were the bathroom doors on the left and right of me. I could tell the sound was coming from the female bathroom, though. I gripped the handle and opened the tiny door a little crack. The noise was very clear now, and at this point it didn't have me scared, but confused. I yelled,
Hey, is anyone in here?
The noise quickly stopped. I paused a moment, listening hard through the tiny crack of the door, and I swear I could hear breathing. I instantly shut the door, still gripping the handle tightly, and flicked on my radio.
This is 1-3. I need help in the food court bathrooms. I think someone's here.
I got no response. This was really strange, and it put me further on edge. Policy was to always answer the radio, no matter what.
This is 1-3. Does anyone copy?
Still no response. I again opened the door a tiny crack.
Listen, dude.
I said, sounding as intimidating as possible.
If you don't come out with your hands up, you're not gonna like the outcome.
I sat there at the door, quite honestly terrified at this point, but there was no response. In fact, there was no noise at all. It went completely silent. I finally yelled out in the bathroom,
Alright, dude, I'm coming in. If you do anything stupid, it's not my fault you'll never walk again.
I tried my hardest to sound scary, but my voice was quivering at this point. This whole situation made no sense at all. Why would someone be in the female bathrooms? I very slowly opened the door, and scanned my flashlight slowly across the room. All the stall doors were open, and the room was completely empty. I was definitely losing it at this point. I built up enough courage to walk into the center of the bathroom, closing the door behind me. After a couple seconds of further searching with my flashlight, I heard the creaking of the door behind me. I span around, basically crying at this point, and shone my flashlight on a huge dude. He was at least a head taller than me. He was Caucasian, and at least in his 40s with gray hair all over his forehead. He was mid-opening the door, but stopped dead in the middle of his action when I put my flashlight on him. He just looked at me, smiling. I'm not gonna lie, I was so scared I froze. He lifted his finger up to his mouth, signifying the shush gesture, before swinging the door open all the way and sprinting out with what looked like to be a small knife in his hand. This guy was just behind the entrance door when I was opening it, and I totally missed him. I was so close to him, and I didn't even notice. He could have killed me if he wanted, and that thought still haunts me to this day. Later that night, my radio started working again, and I instantly told my coworkers about my story. They collectively went pale, and I told them what happened. They all had similar stories, and had also seen the guy at some point that night, although he was never caught. The other staff working that night fully sweeped them all after my encounter with them. I didn't sweep it with them, as I was too disturbed at that point. I worked the night shift for another week after that before I quit. I'm not sticking around a job like that after the experience I went through. It was 2016, and I had just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. I'm 21 and a female. One of my friends named Michael got me the job. For a few days, I did training with the owner in the mornings, and for 2 nights, Michael trained me. Our job was the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. It was nothing exciting, just checking in guests and doing paperwork. My boss had went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which caused me to get minimal training as I was hired just before he left. Anyway, it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property, and there was a large glass window all around the office building with a glass door. It was fairly early in the night, at around 1 a.m., and I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork. That's when a man walks in, and he asks if I have any rooms available. Usually, if someone's sketchy, my boss has me lie and say no, but he seemed normal at the moment. Without hesitation, I said,
Yeah, of course, just for one?
and he replied saying yeah. So I began creating the reservation on the computer when I noticed he starts swatting the air and mumbling to himself. I try to ignore it. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't my business. So I try to check him into the room as quickly as possible. I give him his key and he's on his way. After a few minutes, the man comes back from his room and slams his hand on the glass door, which causes me to jump. Absolutely terrified, I look up and see him staring at me. He cracks open the door and puts his head through and says,
I can't get in my room. Can you help me?
and my only defense was trying to be helpful, so I replied,
Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me get you another one.
The look he had in his eyes was creepy to say the least. This guy was definitely not in his right mind. I handed him his new key and he went back to his room. I tried texting Michael because he was the one who trained me, though it was in the middle of the night and he was probably asleep. I just needed some guidance. With no reply from Michael, I noticed the man trudging back down the stairs to come back. This was when I go into absolute panic mode. I run back into the office and lock the door. I pull out my pocket knife. It's important to keep something on you to defend yourself during the night. I hear the man in the office saying,
Hello? Hello? I still can't get in my room.
Me being an absolute idiot and not standing my ground and calling the police when I'm feeling scared, I decided to take the situation on alone. I reply, saying I'm on the phone and I'll be right out. I then start frantically calling Michael over and over for help, but no answer. I decided to take a few deep breaths and step out of the office. Although the man wasn't there, he was now in the bathroom. I start hearing him talking to himself, this time angrily saying stuff about killing me. My heart sank. I was still being an idiot and not calling the police. He comes out and I say,
Your key must be broken. Let me escort you to your room.
He agrees. I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater, so with my arms down I was able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I began to walk outside, and he seemed insistent to walk behind me. We began making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stops at our room, and I stop at his room a few doors down. I smile and tell him he must have been trying the wrong room, as it clearly said on the door. He understood, but then asked me if I wanted to come inside with him. He said it in such a creepy way. At this, I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. This time I called the police, but when they arrived, the guy was gone. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take me seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, but still, this one night still terrifies me. I truly believe that guy planned on killing me that night for whatever reason.
So before this whole lockdown thing happened and my dating life went to hell in a handbasket, I used to swipe through Tinder and Bumble quite a lot, looking for girls to hook up with. So I'm bored in my Silver Lake apartment one day when I come across this absolute smoke show of a girl who was listed under the name Lilith. She had these big green eyes, wore pigtails a lot in her profile pictures, and had absolutely no qualms of showing off this big peachy butt she had. She also had this goth girl vibe going, which was something I find really attractive. I mean, she was definitely not the kind of girl I'd bring home to mom, but that's not really what I'm looking for when I'm swiping, so naturally, I swipe right. Boom. We match. I think I actually let out this involuntary "no way" when the old "it's a match" text appeared, and kinda cynically told myself, nah, she's a bot, this isn't real. But yup, it was real, and she was so cute to talk to. At first, anyway, because things started to go a little different when we actually met up. She worked at this coffee shop at the Getty and asked me if I wanted to pick her up after her shift so she could take me somewhere real special, which turned out to be the Museum of Death on Hollywood Boulevard. I mean, not my ideally romantic place to go on a first date, but like I said, she was a slam piece, and it was basically impossible to say no to her. So it was decided, and after I picked her up, she kept it a mystery for a while, only telling me to drive her to Hollywood Boulevard before revealing where she actually wanted to go. The area around the museum is kind of sketchy, but again, I'd have driven through way worse neighborhoods for a date with this girl, so I just pushed all my concerns to the back of my mind. Despite the interior being as dark and dingy as it was, looking like an over-clustered basement, the whole thing was actually kind of interesting at first. But I'd be lying if I said my eyes stayed on the exhibits the whole time, when they were pretty much glued to her butt whenever I wasn't going to get caught looking. It most definitely wasn't particularly creepy either, but the things that Lilith started to say to me as we were walking around the place did in a big, bad way too. Like I said, the exhibits were interesting, but that's all they were aside from being gross and spooky. There were death masks, body parts preserved in formaldehyde, all the things you might come to expect from a place called the Museum of Death, and then some. But this Lilith chick starts saying how pretty some of this stuff is, looking at it the way any other girl might look at a picture of a puppy or something. She then starts asking me all these weird questions about how I'd like to die. Yeah, how I'd like to die. I tell her I wouldn't like to die at all. I mean, it was legit the creepiest question I think I'd ever been asked, and she insists that everyone has a way they'd most want to die. I don't want to screw up the date or anything. She seemed crazy, and crazy girls can be real fun, if you catch my meaning, so I give her some throwaway response like, whatever way is most pain-free. She starts telling me how that was a boring answer, and how she'd like to die of hypothermia because it apparently makes you feel all warm and sleepy towards the end. How some victims of hypothermia have even taken their clothes off before they died and just laid down in the snow or whatever before their heart stops beating. She also then gave me this long, in-depth speech about how taking another person's life would be better than even getting intimate, if you catch my drift. How that feeling of pure power must dwarf any feeling that drugs or alcohol have to offer. She then tells me how hot she thought it would be to watch me drown at the bottom of a pool while there's an audience and I'm totally naked. How it'd actually turn her on to see my final moments of desperation before my body went limp and floated around the tank. Then something about how the Vikings would make wings out of the skin on a person's back by peeling it off and spreading it out, calling it beautiful, how it was like art or something. When she's done telling me all of that, and I'm suitably freaked out, she starts calling me pet, and how she wanted me chained up at the end of her bed so she could do whatever she wanted with me. Now, any other girl, I'd think that was incredibly kinky, but after what Lilith had just talked about, I really didn't think what she had in mind for me involved any kind of pleasure whatsoever. When it came to driving her home, she actually told me to stop a few blocks away from her house because she didn't want me to know exactly where it was that she lived at, saying that you couldn't be too careful these days with all the psychos in the world who use dating apps. Yep, she said that to me after she'd spent like an hour talking about all the ways she'd want to die or how she'd watch me die. As soon as I got home, I blocked her number. I've never been more scared of anyone like that before, let alone a girl I wanted to hook up with.
I am a 19-year-old female living in rural England. It's pretty much the middle of nowhere. Pokemon Go had just gone live here, and being a total freak for the series, I had to check it out immediately. I've been loving it so far. One feature in the game is that you can use an item called incense to attract more Pokemon. I found out fairly quickly that incense works a lot better on the move. If I stayed around my house while using it, I'd only ever attract the usual Pidgeys and Weedles. But if I used it whilst out jogging, I'd often come across more interesting and varied finds. Since it lasts for 30 minutes after being activated, I'd been using the incense around 10 minutes into my jog, which was when I'd reach these woods which I run through. It's midday, so I'm not too worried as I'm making my way through the heart of the woods by myself, stopping sporadically to catch abras and slowpokes and whatnot. This is a hotspot for Pokemon, so my attention is fixed to the screen of my phone, my headphones blocking out all noise around me. That's why I didn't hear him approach. I was interrupted by a tap on my shoulder, which nearly gave me a heart attack. I whip out my earphones and spin to face whoever was there. It's some creepy, sweaty man in his mid-30s, with a scruffy beard and wild hair. He was dressed in that army man, cheap camo jacket and trouser getup, almost like he was trying to blend into the surroundings. Instinctively, I freeze up. My mind goes blank, and all I can do is stare back at him. He doesn't say anything at first, his face doing all the talking. The intensity of his gaze was haunting. His eyes opened so wide, it was almost like he didn't have eyelids. Then, completely emotionless, in an almost robotic fashion, he says, "Give me a reason not to kill you." I can barely react. All I want to do is sprint the hell away, but my legs are set to hibernate mode. I can't even respond verbally to him. "No one would ever know it was me," he says, but not like it was directed at me, but to himself, like he was really contemplating it, or convincing himself. Adrenaline was starting to take effect now, and I was pretty much ready to kick this guy in the sweet spot and make my escape. But after the most uncomfortable silence in existence, he turned around and calmly walked back through the thicket. I tear up with fear as this guy disappears out of sight, and then sprinted home as fast as my legs could propel me. Thankfully, he didn't follow. What worries me is that this is like future serial killer type of behavior. It felt like I was some sort of test run or something, like he was gauging my reaction. Trust me when I say that these woods are literally in the middle of nowhere, secluded to the point where I don't think I've ever seen another soul in there before this encounter. I haven't been out jogging since this happened, but when I do, I'll definitely be changing my route. This whole thing wasn't the game's fault, and I could have run into this weirdo anywhere. But it does go to show that you should always pay attention to your surroundings when playing the game. It's easy to let your guard down when your face is immersed in your smartphone, and your headphones are in.